What's going on, everybody? This is Black Men Sundays. I'm your host, Corie Murray. We're talking about generational wealth. We're talking about finance. We're talking about business. And before we get to today's guest, my man, Eric, who do you have for our Black Men Sunday Spotlight, my brother?
Today, Corie, I'm just kind of, again, want to emphasize some things that it's no accident that we didn't learn about. And I'm going to start with this. It is no accident that you learned about Helen Keller instead of W.E.B. Du Bois. It's no accident that you learned about the Watts and the L.A. riots, but not the Tulsa or Wilmington. You learned about George Washington's dentures were made from wood rather than there was actual teeth from slaves. You learned about the Black ghetto, but not about the Black Wall Street. It's no accident that you learned about the New Deal, but not redlining. You learned about the Tommy Smith fist in the air at the '68 Olympics. You did not learn about that he was sent home the next day and stripped of his medals. You learned about the Black crime, but not white criminals were never lumped together and discussed in terms of their race. You learned about the states' rights as the cause of the Civil War, but not about the slavery was mentioned 80 times in the Articles of Secession. You know, privilege is having history rewritten so that you don't have to acknowledge uncomfortable facts. And that's my spotlight for today.
Thank you, Eric, for that Black Men Sunday Spotlight. Let's get on to today's guest, Marsha Robbins. This sister here has a Bachelor of Arts in Theater Management. That's going to play a major part in our show today. She has a master's in elementary education. But you know, this Black Men Sundays, we talking about finance, generational wealth. She's the founder and the executive director of Dramatic Education Incorporated. Let's talk about that a little bit. First off, Marsha, I want to welcome you to Black Men Sunday. Sister, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. So let's start out. What is Dramatic Education Incorporated?
Dramatic Education is an educational arts company. So we partner with public schools, charter schools, private schools, and organizations to bring arts and entertainment with students, pretty much kindergarten through 12th grade. So that can look like drama classes, music classes, dance classes, education courses, teacher workshops, arts and integration, just among other activities outside the school day. So not your reading and your math. We leave that to the professionals. We take care of the enrichment.
Gotcha. Yeah. And just, me doing my research on you, I noticed you had a few positions open. I said, oh, she's hiring for that. And also, let me just educate you guys a little bit. We're talking about Marsha Robbins here. She utilized documented research findings about arts to assist children in developing personal and social skills. So let's talk about some of those findings before we dive into the business ventures.
So very early on, my background, like you said, was entertainment, but also I have a master's in education and I taught. My first year in, I could see where that missing link was between students learning and how well they did in the classroom, which was that confidence piece, that speaking out piece. So, people think of theater and drama, being on stage and on television. That is important, of course, right? That's our entertainment that we watch. But it's also important to develop that in the earlier years. And I found that if you develop it socially, emotionally, in all the developments, that kids, they are the kids that raise their hand, right? You're the kid that's speaking out in class. You're on radio, right? You're the ones that say, hey, or talk, telling the jokes. And you got to find a place in the classroom for it. And then sometimes your shyer students may not be doing well in the classroom. And then we found that arts and entertainment brought out that educational aspect in the school system.
Coming up, why was that a passion for you?
Well, I was that student that got in trouble. Both my parents are educators. And I actually went to school with my mother. So when I got in trouble, they would send, old school, they would send you to your mother's classroom. Right. And don't even bypass the principal's office. Just go down to your mother's classroom. And it was my fourth grade teacher that says, has she thought about doing theater? And my mom was like, one of the entertainment is not something that you see in predominantly Black schools or, in elementary schools at that. And I tried out for a magnet program in South Florida, and I got and that's when I was introduced to the arts. So I had a place for my voice. I had a place for the speaking out. I had a place for being silly and funny in class, right? So I had a place that gave me a direction. So then my reading and math scores went up because I had a classroom that I could, have creativity. And so it was that balance that led me to, amongst other things, that led me to where I am right now.
So let's talk about dramatic education. We've talked about what it is, but I noticed in my research, you have over 130 employees and you're hiring over 20 staffing positions. So let's talk about that on Black Men Sundays.
My company over the last 17 years has grown. We started with 1, right? And then it went from 15, and then we kind of hovered at that 20 mark. And then there was an opportunity for us to partner with a large school district. And now we provide services in 22 plus schools. And that's before care and after care enrichment programs. And through that contract, we hire over 134 employees. And right now, of course, it's back to school time. So everybody, whether you start in the next 2 weeks or you start in the next month in our up north schools, we got to get teachers in place. We got to get staff members in place. So we are still looking for 20 additional, we call them after school staff counselors. And so they help with homework and they help with enrichment activities. So it's perfect for post high school graduate or your college student who's looking for about 20 hours a week, or your retiree who wants to make an impact in the community. We have all ranges in our age, but most of our staff members that are doing these roles are between the ages of probably about 20 to the early 30s. Check us out online and click the hiring tab and see what different opportunities we have. We also have some management available as well, but the bulk of our hirees are from our after school teachers, counselors.
Definitely. And how can they get in contact with you?
We're on all social media platforms. So if you dramaticeducation.com, on Twitter, we're Arts in the School. We have Instagram, DE Education. But if you type in dramatic education, it'll pull it up, and just click on that hiring tab, or just click on, just kind of poke around and see what we do out in the community.
Yeah, and I definitely noticed you do a lot in the community. I saw a few of the anchors from the station that I work with reposting, and I saw the awards and the accolades that you won, but we'll talk about that later. First off, we're talking about Marsha Robbins as an educator right now. We're going to get into the business side in a second, but before we do that, fellas, any questions?
Hey, this is Commissioner Scott from Atlanta, Georgia. How you doing?
How you doing?
I got one quick question. What has been the biggest challenge that you've overcome while fundraising for your nonprofit? Start with one employee initially.
So the one thing I always have to address, many people ask, am I for-profit or nonprofit? We're for-profit. And that was very strategic going in. Of course, when you think theater is always nonprofit, 501c3. But there's the good and the bad and the ugly to having nonprofit organizations that I learned very early on. So when we started out, I was strategic with, sports, that's for profit, right? Ballet, that's for profit, right? So it's like, well, why do I have to be, nonprofit? So I kind of did my research, and we started off with parents. If you want it, you got to pay for it, right? And start off small. Right. And something that is worth investing in, right? You talk about investment. If it's worth investing in, you're going to put your money where your mouth is. And, on the flip side of nonprofit, when you're starting early on, getting nonprofit dollars, which you were saying, it's very hard to get, right? They want to know your reach. They want to know your impact. So if you're saying I have this great idea and it can impact thousands, but right now you're impacting 10, that grant that comes in is only about $10,000, right? And then it gets exhausted. So I said, okay, well, let's do this on the flip side, because my private schools, my charter schools, and public schools, they're already nonprofit. So it was easily strategically to kind of filter my way in and say, you need a service that I can provide, and you already have the status. Right. And now you have to pay me for this service because, my service does have a social entrepreneurship piece to it. So it's not just greed, but it benefits that I didn't have to go after the same dollars that they're going after. So that's kind of how I strategically kind of went from one And then once we, I had one myself and and then I couldn't do it anymore. And I had the funding, then I had 10, 20 students. Now I need 2. And then you got 50 students, now you need 3. And then you have 1,000 students, and now you need a lot more than that.
Okay, thanks. So you say you did have some nonprofits prior to this business, right? Here's an age-old question, because a lot of people start nonprofits. They want to be the executive director and pay themselves a salary, right? So how did you determine the salaries of the staff members in your nonprofit organizations that you've been in, or you as an executive director?
Well, I tell you, you don't. Like, just the nugget one-on-one coming in, you do not pay yourself, right? And so I know it's they say it's a myth. You have to pay yourself, you have to eat. But the reality is, in order for your nonprofit to sustain past that first, few years of ground starter up, there is no salary for your executives, not at the top level. You know where your salaries actually come from on that bottom level. You're the ones that are in the field. Like, you're the concept, you're the idea, right? You have to feed the idea to flourish. So really, you got to start with paying all your, I would say, your entry level coming in, so that they're able to sustain. You'll get to the point where you're able to give yourself a salary, but initially starting off, when you get the nonprofit dollars coming in, it's designated, right? It'll say you have to spend it on this, and then you have to spend it on, the staff, and then the programming is the bulk, right? So you have to put all those dollars back into the programming. So there's very little room. And if you do carve out, they allow, I forgot what that percentage is, they'll allow that percentage to be for your administrative costs. But your administrative cost is your pens and your pencils and your building and your running around and everybody who needs to help you get done what needs to get done. So I would say that, going into all, my nonprofits out there, don't build your salary first, build it last. Build your team salary, right? You can designate 10 weeks of this to this person, or 25 weeks, build that all out, and then look at and then once you get another grant, all those 10% add up. Then there's your salary. And, but that comes down the line. If you start that way, the backwards way, your nonprofit will be scraping by for a very long time.
You're launching a co-op office in Winter Park, Florida, and you're expanding your business after being a former educator. So let's just talk about the steps that went into that, the ideas, because as Black people, I feel like a lot of times we have ideas, we want to do X, Y, Z, but then we don't really do anything because we put so much on the plate that is so full that we're not getting enrichment. So from your point of view, being an educator, just what went into the next steps of launching a business?
Really, it was the idea, right? So, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. It was always, instilled in me. But of course, you take that traditional route. So I had an entertainment degree. And again, that was still non-traditional. And then me teaching was a traditional route. But finding that nugget of what was missing in education. And I say in general, with any business idea, right, there has to be something that's missing, or something that you can add to that somebody else wants or needs. And that's kind of where it stemmed. And I had fun with it. I was like, and at first it was just a passion, right? It was without cost. It was just something like, let's see if this will work. And as it started to work, right, started with just a club after school, and just, free, I got a little stipend, but the kids didn't pay anything. But that spark in their eyes, I was like, oh, okay. And then I started to use it, and I taught third grade. So anybody who teaches third grade, or, if you have a third grader, that third grade is a testing grade across, nationally. That is where, you're going from learning to read to understanding and comprehending, and they want you to test on that in order to go to the next grade. And I started to use theater in the classroom. That's where that research, when I was working on my master's, that's where the research came into play. I had, English language learners, ELL students, or, the ones who didn't speak English as their first language. I said, if you can play, as you're reading, if you can play this in your mind, you'll understand what you're reading. So Jack can't just be Jack you don't know. Jack is in a movie and you have to, so I took a student who didn't speak any English and she passed the test. I was like, that's it. I got it. I know what it takes for kids to be successful using arts and entertainment, and it kind of bloomed from there.
So how do you determine what a student's particular learning style is?
You can tell, like, if you have to build that relationship, and coming in, you have kids that are visual, kids that, some kids have to read it first. So that is why it's important we put our schedules on the board. So you like to know, you might be that kid like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Like you're worried about the next, right? So we put the schedule on the board. Like there's a rhyme and a reason for everything that we do, in education. So just learn. And I taught gifted. So my kids already came in knowing, throughout my time, they knew what they needed to know. And so it was like, so now how can I expand on what their interests were? Because they was like, I can do this third grade work. So we were learning about anything under the sun. And that's where, the true art of teaching comes in, right? Learning your students and learning how they learn and talking with the parents because they know them best. And then just trying to find that spot for them that they can fit, right? And every kid is not going to be your drama kid. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're just doing the exposure because every kid does need to ask a question, right? Every kid does need to speak up when they don't understand something. So if we can just take some of those pieces that come from arts and entertainment and kind of merge them into education, that's where that sweet spot is for students.
Well, it's interesting. I learned, I have a mentor named Mabel Robinson. I don't know if you ever heard of her, but she played in Harlem, Cotton Comes to Harlem. She actually choreographed the Wiz with Michael Jackson, but she was
yes.
She was the artistic director in at the National Black Repertory Company that produced the National Black Theater Festival. And one thing she told me, I was actually a project director there for a summer. And she said, Corie, she said, I know you're an engineer and you're about to go back into the engineering profession. She said, understand that that's a role and you need to play the role of an engineer when you go back to your next job, right? So I think sometimes we don't understand the importance of the artistic field and teaching these students how to play the roles that they're going to be getting to for the professional career. So I think it's great you're doing that. Keep up the great work.
Definitely. And I know it's Black Men Sunday, so I have to say, like, you guys have me on as a guest and I'm thankful, but I do have a Black man by my side that when I had this crazy idea, right, I was 8 year in, carried the insurance, had my 5-year-old, and I said, I want to leave. I had to have that Black man saying, as long as you don't get the cable cut off. I said, all right, all I got to do is take care of the cable bill. I got you. And so that was, so I was able to step away and he kind of carried it all. It got hard sometimes, but I said, you only told me I got to keep the cable on. So I think we had the cable bill and we was eating on beanies and weenies because, back in the day it was cable. Now we got all these streaming platforms, but so I appreciate being on, but there's definitely a partnership. I know when we get to the business side, there's a partnership that went into how I was successful that's leading to now our family being successful.
For other teachers, for brothers, for sisters that have some money to play with, but they're not really in the investments of real estate. Black Men Sundays, we've had a lot of real estate agents, real estate investors, guys that got rich off real estate. So, but we're talking to Marsha Robbins today. So from your point of view, because you're in Winter Park, Florida, I mean, if anybody that knows anything about Orlando, it's a hot commodity, it's a hot property at the same time. So, we talked about the mindset earlier, but financially, just, give some advice for some brothers and sisters that may want to take on a venture as well outside of their 9 to 5.
The opportunity kind of pushed our way. We always wanted to have a space. And I can tell you, we started off, Dramatic Ed started off in the home, right? I had, close employees came to the home. Then 15 plus years ago, it wasn't as popular as it is now, working in a co-op space where you rented an office for a couple of hours. You got in there an hour before, you put the paintings on the wall, you put your sign on the door, and then you held your interviews there as if that was your space, right? And then I outgrew that space, and then I went into a space. I remember like it was yesterday. It was a 500 square foot space. I think it cost me $500 a month at that time. I was like, woo, and that was my first introduction to that real estate side, because the person who rented me the building, this is where the God moment was. He was a big real estate mogul in Orlando. You could, if you said his name anywhere, they knew, they knew who he was. He was attached to multi deals. He had commercial properties. And I just used to sit in his office. He's in his late 80s now. He retired and sold that building. But I used to just sit in his office, and I used to just collect all the gems and the jewels. His dad owned real estate, which passed it on to him. And I just was like, so how can I do it? Right? How can I have a piece? And at that moment, of course, I didn't know how that piece was going to happen, but it was always in the back of our mind. I did buy a condo earlier on before I was married. So, setting yourself up for good practices, I would say early on. And then when my husband and I, we purchased another home together. So now we have 2 homes. And then when we are interested, that's when the real estate investor was like, so now you use that collateral. And then, right now, real estate is on fire, right? And then we were thinking about selling our home and renting. We were like, let's get the cash. We don't know what we're going to do with it. Let's just go ahead and sell this home. We can make this amount of money on it. And then we can use that to platform somewhere else, but we couldn't. And we just kept hitting brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. And I said, well, let's just pull the house, forget it. And my landlord came to me, because now I've moved into a 2,500 square foot space, and, real estate is booming. He said, you know what, I want to turn your space and the spaces next to you into commercial, into high rises. So now I don't have a space, and now I have to find a space. And so I said, well, let's see if we can purchase a space. And we started looking. And when I say this building had our name on it, I'm actually in the building as we speak. It had our name on it. It's in a great area, an affluent neighborhood. Is also, arts and entertainment is just well known. We got an art school down the road, got Starbucks. It's just a great. And when we put our offer in without hesitation, I was shocked, because everything else we had been bidding on, we were getting outbidded. And I telling you, this had our name on it because she just Googled the company, and she's like, I had 3 offers, but I'm going to go with you. And, but you got to set yourself up to have that strong financial backing, because of course, they start pulling and they start seeing you trying to be in this neighborhood. Can you uphold the value? And we have. So we did some renovations on the space. We kind of elevated and added a little bit more spice to where we are. But, here we are. So our upstairs is for the administration of dramatic education, and our downstairs does a lot, does training, it does events, it does co-ops, it does, small gatherings. It has a technology room, and it's just kind of like a multifunctional space and we call it the creative center, because that's exactly what we want it to be, a creative center for the city of Winter Park.
Commissioner Scott from Atlanta again, got one quick question. A lot of times I think we focus on, individual personal investments, as far as having brokerage accounts or, mutual funds. For your business, have you set up, or will you set up, a brokerage account for your business, or a trust or anything to pass on a generational wealth once you're gone?
Kind of gave it some thought. So that's twofold, right? On the business side, people talk about ESOP, employee shared plan, that's more so because what was built on some great employees that believed in the vision, right? And as we continue to expand, not just here, Central Florida, but nationally, we have some different opportunities. I want the employees kind of to reap the benefits of what dramatic education is doing. Then on the side of the building, right, that, my husband and I, that we purchased. So Dramatic Ed rents from, our separate entity, which, a real estate company that we put the building in. So that we can set up, right? So that I want to create generational wealth with that piece, because who knows, my daughter or my children, they may not want to take over dramatic education, right? Or it may not be in their plans. My husband has a commercial cleaning company. She may not want to go on that lines. But real estate is something that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? Everybody's dibbling a little bit in the real estate. And I took that nugget from, the real estate investor that, I rented from years ago. His father brought a big property out in Winter Park, Florida. When he passed, he passed it on to his wife. When she passed it to him. And of course, the building is paid free and clear. And now a large company, a national company, is renting that building and has for over 15 years. And that rental is going to his kids and grandkids. So when the money comes in, so 10 plus years ago, he put that in my head. So now all he does is he just goes into their account. That could be for new sneakers, or it could be for a car payment, or it could be for something, down the line. But that building is in a trust. So that building is going to make generational wealth for his family, whichever direction that they choose. And that's what I want to do with this particular building, that it's separate from dramatic education, because this, it's a business. It can be sold. It can expand. It can dissolve. You just don't know what the future holds with it.
Thanks for that info, because I was watching a documentary and it talked about the difference between the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, and how the Vanderbilts, they end up going broke, but the Rockefellers, they keep passing wealth down for generations and generations because of something similar that they put in place via trust. Thanks for the info, though.
In my family, we're talking about generational wealth. Typically, the family member passes away. They typically sell the house or the whatever, and then they go their separate ways. But I feel like with you, you're establishing generational wealth from what the term was derived from. So if you can just expound a little bit more on that, because a lot of our listeners want to achieve generational wealth. They believe in stocks, they believe in investing, but with the property that you have and with what you're doing with it, if you can just talk a little deeper about just how generationally you're going to help.
Yes, and you're absolutely correct, because when we think generational wealth, I say we as in our community, we think just us or just our downline, one downline, right? But we're not thinking, many years past us, because my husband's family is from Florida Keys. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know how many Black people live in the Florida Keys, but there was a community, and there's still a community there in Marathon where their property, once the grandparents passed on, they sold it. And, just think about now what it costs to live in the Florida Keys, right? So it's just, I would say generational wealth in general is just passing on beyond what you can see, not thinking about anything that you're going to be able to reap in this generation, right? It has to be past you. So I may not see the glory days. Well, I'm doing pretty well, but it might be my great grandkids that say, this is what she did, and it set up this and it set up that. And that's what we have to kind of look at when we're looking at generational wealth. Like, can we set up multiple properties that's in a trust, right? That no one can touch, that just has to keep getting passed down and passed down. But that's hard to do. Sometimes we don't even want to do life insurance because you're thinking somebody gonna kill you off, right? And you're like, no, but just that small piece will set up. That's immediate. That sets up the next person, your spouse or your children, or maybe your great grandchildren. But then going beyond that, it's looking at generational wealth.
Generational wealth isn't something passed down. It's okay, they passed away. You want the couch, you want the sofa, you want this and that, come get it. We're selling the house. That's how generational wealth was presented to me. But then when I have family members that live up north who don't own anything, been in the same house since the 70s, you move out, there's nothing to come from that. So I guess I really, because there's Black Men Sundays and we talking to brothers 18 to 55. I really want you to touch on the importance of generational wealth in the Black community, because I look at family members that have had properties in Miami, had properties in South Florida, and they didn't really have a job, they didn't really have a lot going on. So someone came and said, "Hey, I'll give you $100,000 cash for your property," not realizing the property's worth 400,000, but they took the money and moved out. And I feel like generationally, we're catching losses from that perspective. So can you touch on that for us?
And that's one of those topics that it just depends on the person, because if grandmother or mother left you something and you financially can't even do anything with it, I mean, you're just not going to be able to pass down, right? But I think now with knowledge, we understand if we can just hold on to it and create a rental income out of it. And I think now more than ever, the knowledge is out there, right? You're talking 20 plus years ago, we maybe didn't have all of this information, Black Men Sundays and things like that at your fingertips. So for me, it just starts with one family at a time, and I learn, you got to learn from somebody else who learns from somebody else. So, my brother, he's setting up generational wealth for his family. But when you sit around and you're eating barbecue with your family, I think we have to pause and have these conversations, because that's the one thing that I get on my family all the time. I say, yeah, it's good to catch up on your life and the gossip of who did what, but let's carve out just a little bit and talk about what can we do to further as a family. Like, and of course that gets deep and everybody has different perspectives. But if we all can just keep having these conversations, like what you're putting in the community, but now let's take these same Black Men Sunday and let's have it Family Sundays. Take that same information that you're hearing and just say, hey, you know what I just heard? Let's talk about it. What does generational wealth mean for our family? Grandma, do you have a piece of land you want me to hold on to? Can we put some cabins? Can we put some trailers on it? Right? Like, my father had mother has a piece of property that no one wants to deal with. And then one of the cousins did something and now you put a few trailers on it, out in the country. Sometimes you're just paying the taxes on the land and I don't want to be bothered. But if you're thinking about how this is going to benefit our family as a whole, like the Hilton name, you're sleeping in the Hilton bed, that's a generational wealth. So if you can build something, even if it's a 2-family home on a piece of property, and you put your name on that fence that says Robbins or Culver's or Howell on it, you just created something for somebody else. Now, I can't tell you what you can do with it once I've passed on, but that's when you put those practices in place, trust, that commissioner was, speaking of, so that it can pass on the right way. But even beyond, when you start getting technical and you need lawyers and things like that, just those small things of just having the conversation of what does it mean in our family and what can we pass on, and not just, grandmother's recipes, right? Let's pass on some land. Let's pass on some of that wisdom. But yeah, I mean, it's those tough conversations, and we have to have them. We have to have them beyond what we're doing.
Yes. And speaking of those tough conversations, we're Black men on here. What's the problem with Black men in our community today from your point of view?
I would say, be from an educator standpoint, starting young, like our boys. And my father and my parents are educated. My father was an educator at a predominantly, Miami Northwestern. It's just everybody, the greatest of the greats come out of it. So, but what he found, and he has his doctorate in education, Black boys, they love to move, right? There's a reason why Black men run fast, can jump high, like it's in the DNA. Like there's studies around that. But then educational wise, sometimes that's not recognized in the classroom setting. So that's still that same student. And I had him in my 3rd grade class, that same student who's a busybody, out of the chair, always doing something, maybe can't control. So it's just starting young and allowing the same things we instill in our girls, we kind of have to start instilling in our boys, of getting that education very early. My husband was a great football player that went off to school at And he said the same thing looking back. He's like, man, I wish that someone just would have slowed me down and said, just pay attention to education. Just get educated. Slow down. You can do sports as well. And I know they're doing a better job now, because now you can't play sports without having a great, a good GPA. But before, it was kind of like you play ball and that's about all you did, right? And they didn't worry about the education side. So I would say that education piece is first. Also, getting you a good partner is key. You can't do it alone. You can. I will say that it's easier if you have a sounding board. It's easier if you have a partner that can float, right? And then start soon. I know sometimes we having these conversations in our late 30s and saying, I want to get into real estate. Man, get into real estate in your 20s. When you're or 25, when you're coming out of school and you get that first paycheck. Look, if you can show them a guaranteed salary and you can get something really small, that can be your stepping stone for the next project, to the next project. So those are kind of my nuggets, and that can go not just Black Men Sunday, that's Black Women Sundays too. It's just, it's both folds.
Yeah, and definitely, it's Black Men Sundays, but Black women listen to the show. I have over 50% of people that are not people of color that listen to the show. My grandma hates me to say that, because she says people of color, colored people, what's the difference? So that's a later topic. We're going to get on that in a minute. But, I kind of want to stay on the topic of generational wealth gap and the wealth gap, because, in our community, we talk about generational wealth, but we don't talk about generational poverty. From your perspective, as an educator, as a business owner, what can Black men do? Because a lot of times Black men, when I speak to them, man, they're not giving me a job. They're not giving me this. It's almost like, and I'm not speaking for them, but from what I get, they're looking for a handout. They're looking for an easy answer to the question on the test. And you're a teacher, so that kind of fits in perfectly with you. But as Black men, and even Black women in general, that have kids that are being raised, you said start young, but financially, from your point of view, what can they do at an early age to prevent the generational poverty that we've seen in our communities for generations?
Exposure. Getting your kids out from a baby. When I was a teacher and I didn't have kids, I would look at the kids that were great in my classroom, and I was looking at what did that parent do, to make such a great kid. Because I said, when I have a kid, I want my kid to be like this kid. I was teaching 8 and 9-year-olds. I said, well, by 8 or 9, they have a great, a personality. They have some kind of development. So what I found that I instilled in my nieces and nephews, and in programming across the board, and when I talk to other business, it's the exposure that we do. When you're in the grocery store and they're 6 months old, I kid you not, you pick up an apple and you say, hey, here's an apple. Just as small as that, the exposure. Because on these tests, these standardized tests, it was so shocking to me. And I taught in Title I and non-Title I, and that's low social economic versus, so I've taught all over. It was shocking to me when you say a cow and a kid has never seen a cow. Or if you say Disney and they live in, that's just like in South Florida, and you say South Beach, and I lived in South Florida, and I'm like, we don't go to South Beach. That's for the, right? It's the same thing, the exposure of just, and that doesn't cost anything. And that's the thing that I tell my parents. Listen, I will tell my parents in a heartbeat, start teaching them, start showing them, give them money, like let them walk in the store and let's talk, go into the different neighborhoods and say, look at this and look at that, and expose them to different career forms. Because what happens when we live in our little bubbles, we don't see past the bubble. I have kids, I'm like, what do you want to be when you grow up? They might say a bus driver or a cashier. And I just say, no judgment. I say, why? Oh, my grandma, she a bus driver. That's because they haven't got outside their bubble. You're right. So, and I know our school systems are doing a better job of the exposure, traveling. I know I listened to your podcast, and I one of your guests you had back in June was talking about just traveling outside of the U.S. And I know that takes money, and that's on the higher end, but traveling outside your community, right? I have people that haven't traveled outside of their community to see what other people live like and what's out there. And that's the piece. If we can do that, that will break, I'm gonna say 50% of the generational poverty, because you're like, you mean I could drive that if I work a little bit harder? I don't have to take public transportation because that's what I grew up on. So that's just my low level of that I say to anybody is just get out there and expose your kids and expose yourself to just different opportunities.
This is Kalali Dogbe. I'm from actually I'm living out of Prince Frederick, Maryland right now. So have you had any thoughts of expanding outside of Florida?
We have, and we've had some talks and communication on it. And for me, it was I'm compared to some of the large organizations. I won't name them, but they're my direct competitors here. And so we've done throughout Florida. We're in talks with Alabama. We got some roots in different places, but it was very important for me early on is to kind of package it the right way, because I didn't want to send it somewhere else. We also had licensing and thinking about franchising down the road. So yes, that's definitely the growth of dramatic education side. That's when we were talking about creating some wealth on the side of our great employees. Maybe we can take this outside of Central Florida and provide some job opportunities nationwide. So yeah, that's definitely in the works.
Have you thought about actually charting a school around the dramatic education ethos? Or
if you listen, that must be somebody tugging at my sleeves, because every time, I mean, it keep that's a recurring factor. It's like, you gotta do like Fame School of the Arts. I don't know, like that piece hasn't it comes up. I mean, it makes sense, right? But for me, a school impacts 800, 1,000 if you have a large one. And I want our reach to be so much greater, because I know that it works. I've seen that it works. We have the research. There's a national research that came out of the White House, probably when Obama in the 2000s, where they did all of this research tied behind School of the Arts, right? We know that it works, but why isn't it growing and expanding? So that's just kind of like, can we feed you want to cure world hunger? It's one of those things that I feel like a school might be it's too small. I mean, it can happen, but I want to expand beyond 800, hopefully,
Yeah, so I got one last question for you in this conversation. When you were starting out, like, what impossibilities did you overcome? You know what I'm saying? In order to make your vision a reality.
What complications did I not? Think about a Black female in theater, right? That's not an actress. So everybody behind the stage does not look like me at all. So I was always, from a very young age, when I said I wanted to do stage management and theater management, no one looked like me. So it's like, and I take this from one of my mentors, you have to do, because there is no path, or there is no trail before you. So you just make the mistakes and you just keep going. But there was always something that bugged me that was like, just keep going, even when I hit a brick wall, and from partnerships that dissolved, from financially, you're just going to hit these roadblocks in there, for somebody saying, you can't, or you're up against, like I tell people all the time, I used to beg these big players for contracts, because remember I tell you, I do the arts portion. So I would go knock on their door. Hey, listen, I can make your organization look good. And now I am that organization. And I'm sitting at the table looking at them like, I know you remember me knocking on your window. asking you for the next contract, and that's what it took, right? And you telling me you didn't have the money and you couldn't do it. And just me finding another way. And that's when, when we said for-profit, nonprofit, me finding another way, saying, nonprofit is not the only way. It is a way. It might be a way that I'm going to, venture down again, but just keep finding a way when there's no way. And I know your brother being an actor, he knows that, because you get that audition, you might not land it, but you got to wake up and do the next audition and the next one. And eventually you're going to land it. Right. And that's literally what business is about. Eventually you're going to land it. The plane's going to land, or the break is going to happen. But what happens in our community, sometimes we stop too soon. It gets too hard and you're like, well, no, maybe this is the universe telling me not to. But I'm telling you, if the universe is saying keep moving forward and there's a drive and you keep getting a few yeses, those yeses will pick up momentum.
Man, that's just great. That's some great gems you drop in there. So yeah, definitely appreciate you coming and talking to us. It's been excellent listening to you today.
Thank you.
So I know you and your husband work together great as a team, pull your resources together to actually start a business outside of your old profession. Do you have any tips on couples or individuals from where they're at right now with their current job, what resources they pull from, either 401k or IRA or something like that? And have you ever heard of an index universal life insurance policy that you guys will borrow from to service capital for your business growth?
So transparently, no, I haven't heard of the index. No.
Okay.
But I will say there's no right or wrong. I mean, if you guys can work together to create something, then of course it's ideal. But me and my husband are polar opposites, right? I'm the creative, crazy lady, drama lady is what they call me, right? And he's very level-headed. He has a big commercial cleaning company. So polar opposites, but those two ventures operating separately creates the revenue to, build on something else. In real estate, you would be, for example, when I left, definitely leaning on his income was very important for the success of the business, because then everything that I brought in could go right back into the business. And I wasn't using that money for me, for our family to survive, because sometimes that happens. You're spinning your wheel. You need to bring in some money, but you also got to pay your rent, right? So just having something there, and that could be a nest egg. And I can tell you, this, before I worked, I had my business and I still had a full-time job, and I put away and I was very strategic. And as a teacher, you can do a 403B, which means when you leave, that money is not held in retirement. And so I was fully invested, and I took my 403B, and that's what I used to propel the business, right? You take a small penalty, but you leave a little bit. So you kind of just have to, that's where you start trying to think, okay, maybe this is not my last stop, right? Always think if this is not my last stop. And that's what I was thinking, my first year when they made you sign up and it was like, oh, you can do the vested plan and you make more money, or you can do this plan. That means after 5 years, your money, you can take it with you. Oh, I want that option. I want to be able to take it with me. And that gave the opportunity without me trying to seek out, maybe investors or personal loans or things like that, which is our options. But, you can use some other strategic things to make your dreams come true.
Okay, thanks for that. I would encourage people check out that index universal life plan, though, because there are other ways to go about getting that capital as well that I'm just learning about. The last question I have is, I heard you mention expanding your business. I think Kalila mentioned possibly suggesting that you eventually do something like that too. Do you have a general rule or plan for expanding the business that you could share for other people that may want to expand their business and kind of grow it a little bit?
Plan your business as if you're not in it, because then it can go beyond you. Very early on, when dramatic education started, I wasn't the one teaching because I was full-time teaching. So on the weekend, I would record myself teaching classes, and that video I would show on the weekends, and I would train 10, 15 other people how to do that. But I started off with, it was not just me in the business. So that you got to set your plan up. If you want long-term to be, I want this to be nationwide. Okay, but you want to start building it to be nationwide. And that also means, which I get on, I will say, setting up an accountant, setting up, not it being personally funded through your money, through your bank account, right? Like what was very important early on, and now this is the nugget, very important, books being right. Because when I got that major contract with the big boys, when they opened up my books, they were clean. I had an accountant very early on, and she charged me $100 a month. You can find people out there that will help you. So I set up an account early on. They weren't writing checks to Marsha Robbins. They weren't writing checks to, it was in a dramatic ed account. I did not swipe my grocery bill with my debit card. You can't, because when they start opening up your books and they start seeing your rent coming out, your profit and loss sheet, your balance sheet is your life story. And I can tell you, hands down to my account, she's been with me for conception over 15 years. And that's the one she's like, Marsha, she would see. I think one time I went to Macy's. I had to give me a pair of shoes. And she caught me. She said, that's a costume. She was like, they don't sell costumes. She said, Marsha, I'm going to tell you early on, do not do it. Keep it clean. Let's keep it clean. And then I did it 10 times over. Culver's cleaning, commercial. Keep it clean. Do not swipe your card. Try your best. I don't care if you take a little bit of cash and you move it over to your personal. You want to keep your books and your profit and loss sheet. That will take you. So when you talk about investments and money and getting grants, they look at all those things. I mean, they truly do. And that financial history and record of how you do business is very important. So, I mean, I guess we can end with that, because I'm telling you, if you set up that the right way, I mean, you can walk in anybody's door. That's what I love about, because when the last brother who said, well, how did you do? Because when I opened up my balance sheet, when they see me and they say, oh, it's Black female in theater, really? Yeah, but open up my balance sheet. And they're like, oh, okay. You're doing the things the right way, and now you're playing, you can play with the big boys. You can buy a building, because when they're starting to pull your records for the last 6 months, they see, okay, you got this coming in and this going out. And that does not mean you don't have dips. That does not mean I wasn't affected by COVID, right? So I'm not going to say I'm balling, right? I'm not, it just says that when, that's theory. I got to add my theatrics in there, but that just means when you have dips, when that dip happened, did you adjust, right? They can see I had to lay off 100 employees, but they also saw that I brought my employees back gradually. And the income started to match. I wasn't trying to do it, irreversibly. So you really need a strong team that can direct you to say, hey, no, yes, keep it clean. And that'll take you a long way. That'll take you generational wealth, because you're not hiding your money or you're not mismanaging your money.
Okay, thanks for that advice, because a lot of people, they're in business, they don't even know what a cash flow statement is, a balance sheet, income statement, just the basics. So, I guess we want to encourage everyone just to learn the basic language of accounting.
That's right.
Doing business.
And I had to learn it,
How did you learn it though?
Your local chambers, they have, I picked up classes because I got a master's in education. I was like, I can't go back to school. I really can't. My brother has a MBA. He was like, sis, I'm like, you know what I did, brother? Give me your books. My sister is in finance I said, sis, give me your books. Because I started reading their MBA books. Okay. And that's how I learned it. Or I went to a few classes and I just listened.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you kind of learn. And because you can't walk the first meeting, you might get past, but that third and fourth, you got to really understand what your balance sheet says. Like you're saying, you got to be able to speak the language. And with YouTube and all these different platforms that we have, and you can learn it pretty quickly. Can I ask a question of James, because I keep looking at his 2 kids, and I work with kids all the time. Like, so what does he do to instill in his kids, generational wealth or entrepreneurship or business, because I like to hear from like what parents are doing, because I learn from what others do with their children.
I appreciate you too, Queen, for just coming through and blessing us with this knowledge and stuff. Like I said, I'm out here working and grinding right now, but I've been listening in, and to answer your question, what I do as far as instilling generational wealth in my children is I took a course about 5 years ago that changed my life. It's called Financial Peace University. So I'm completely debt free. My business was all funded through my own capital, and I always make sure that my boys, they just know the simple things about money, which is you give, you save, and you spend, in that order. So, they're 12 and 9, and as far as just, not going into the complexity of it, I just keep it simple with them. Just, hey, look, when you get money, you understand that you got to give a portion of it to God. You got to, be willing to give to others. And then you also got to save for yourself. And then you spend the rest. And, I don't really touch bases on them with investing and things like that as of right now. That's what I instill in them, just the biblical ways of how we should deal with money, which, the borrower is slave to the lender. And, a true man will leave an inheritance to his children's children. So, that's definitely my goal. That's definitely what I'm in strive to do. And that's what I instill in my children and my boys.
Amazing. See how you could just learn. See, now if I was your boy's teacher, I would be looking like, see, what is the dad doing to have great boys? That's what I did. I was like, okay, so this one did this and this one did this, and you put it all together, and you got a recipe for great kids. That's amazing. I like that. That's a gem right there.
Thank you, Marsha, for coming on Black Men Sundays. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you were here with us today, giving us gems, giving us tools, giving the brothers that have kids tools on educating their kids, giving them tips, giving business tips to the business owners, to the brothers that have houses, to the brothers that are renters that don't know what to do with their money. You dropped a lot of gems on us today. This Black Men Sundays, but like I tell you, we have sisters on the show too. Marsha, I hope you enjoyed your time on the show today. Thanks for coming on Black Men Sundays, sister. Did you have a good time?
I did. Thank you for having me on.
Check it.